If you want to learn how to sound more sophisticated when speaking British English, then this lesson is for you. Now, on this channel, I always teach you real life English and help you understand people from all sorts of backgrounds. But real life also includes situations where you may want to sound a little more sophisticated, articulate, and eloquent. And that's exactly what we're going to focus on in this lesson. Ways to sound a bit more sophisticated when speaking in British English. And the first word is quintessentially. This is a word that I absolutely love. Quintessential, we'll use the adjective form, basically means the most typical example or most important part of something. So cream tea is the quintessential British food. It's the perfect example of British food. Now, this word may be a little bit formal, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on with a bit of advice, because not all words that you need to sound more sophisticated needs to be formal. We sometimes actually should avoid those words. We'll talk about that a little bit. But personally, I love this word. Cream tea is quintessentially British. And if you want to learn even more about this lesson, there is a free PDF that you can download in the description below. And please do remember to like and hype the lesson. It helps other learners to watch it as well. But hello, you wonderful people. Welcome to this channel, English Right Now. My name is British English teacher Roy, and I've been doing this for a long time. I've been teaching English for around 16 years, helping people just like you. And I help people with everything from pronunciation in a modern British RP accent, British culture, and slang and idioms. But sometimes we need to add a few more sophisticated expressions when we're in certain situations. And that's what we're looking at today, because I don't want you to only survive in English. I want you to thrive. I want you to be able to express yourself with confidence and knowing many intelligent alternatives to say the same thing. That's what we're learning today. Now, I will say, if your goal is to sound more natural, educated, and sophisticated in British English, the trick is not necessarily using obscure words. It's often choosing the word a native speaker might use in a professional, academic, or thoughtful conversation. So we don't need to add these incredibly formal, obscure words. I often hear students adding these incredibly elaborate words that even sometimes native speakers have to think what they mean. This isn't about alienating your audience, it's about connection. After all, having a rich vocabulary isn't about showing off, it's about having the right word for the right situation. So here are some examples of some excellent upgrades. Instead of very important, try crucial. It was a crucial moment. Instead of very interesting, try fascinating. Wow, that's fascinating. Instead of difficult, challenging. Yeah, the job is quite challenging at times. Instead of very big, try significant. It was a significant moment in his life. Instead of very small, you could try minimal. It took minimal effort. Instead of clear, evident. Well, that is evident from what you've said. Instead of very careful, meticulous. You need to be very meticulous to do this job, which, well, could be quite challenging. Instead of very good, exceptional. Wow, that cream tea is exceptional. Instead of very bad, detrimental. That decision could be detrimental for the future of the company. And instead of very different, you could try something like distinct. That wine has a very distinct taste. Different is quite a loaded word. We'll talk about that in another lesson. Those are all examples of simple upgrades to your English. Now, I'm not saying here that the word important, difficult, careful, or any of those words are wrong. Another thing I really want to make clear is that this lesson is about adding variety. We say variety is the spice of life. We're adding variety to your vocabulary. I am not saying certain words are wrong and the sophisticated words are right. The key is communication, and if you need to use some really simple words to get your point across, there's nothing wrong with that. Effectively, language is like a cake. Once we've got that solid base, only then can we start adding the intricate details, decoration. These sophisticated words are those decorations. They're designed to decorate your English, not to make the core vocabulary or the basics obsolete. And please note, a lot of these words only work under certain circumstances. A lot of them have very specific uses. That's, again, why I give you the examples. You can see how they're actually used. But to give you an example, I said the word detrimental can mean very bad. And it's got that detrimental, has got that idea of damaging or causing some kind of negative effect or some kind of harm. It's detrimental to the company's future. It's detrimental to our reputation. In other words, it's potentially very bad, but also damaging. We would not use the word detrimental to describe a cream tea unless we're talking about the effect on our health potentially. Cream tea is detrimental to my diet. Fine. But I wouldn't say, ooh, I don't like it. That cream tea is detrimental. No, there I'd use another word like awful or dreadful. But what I'm going to do now in this lesson is give you some more sophisticated examples of verbs, simple verbs that we can make them more sophisticated, adjectives, nouns, and so on. So first, let's talk about some sophisticated British verbs. First up, assess. Instead of saying look at, or look at as we commonly say it in spoken English, we could use assess, especially in a business environment. I think we need to assess the situation first. Instead of improve, enhance. It's got that idea of making something better. The new initiative will help to enhance the company's reputation within the community. We could use the verb create, but instead of create, establish. We establish a strong relationship with our clients. Now, you're probably noticing that a lot of these words you maybe would use in the business environment, but that doesn't mean you don't want to be sophisticated outside. It's all about the situation, but quite commonly in the business world, these words will add something to your English. Instead of show, we could use the word demonstrate under certain circumstances. So this demonstrates a high level of competence. In other words, this shows you're very good at your job. A word I love is highlight. Instead of point out, which we might use in everyday spoken English down the pub, highlight really sounds a bit more sophisticated. I'd like to highlight a few key issues, if I may. Oof, very British. Instead of come across, which means like meet or have under certain circumstances, we could use encounter. I encountered several difficulties along the way. The project was quite challenging. In other words, there were some real problems and it was really difficult, but I got the job done. Instead of help, facilitate. You'll notice that quite a few of these are Latin origin words as well if you speak a Latin language. Technology facilitates communication. In other words, technology can help with communication. Or you could say a lot of people use AI to facilitate better workflow. In other words, to make the work easier. Instead of do, you could say undertake. We undertook extensive research. In other words, we did a lot of research. If you have a problem in the office, instead of saying, oh, I'm going to deal with that, you could say, we need to address this problem. Again, maybe between colleagues, you could get away with deal with, but maybe in a presentation to your bosses or to your clients, you may just want to say address. It just sounds a bit more sophisticated. Communicate is a perfectly viable word, but if you want to talk about a message getting across to its audience, you may say convey. This report conveys the message clearly. In a moment, I'm going to talk to you about some sophisticated adjectives, but if you really want to learn British English, then I have something to tell you. We're making an offer that we have never made before. At the moment, we are offering monthly subscriptions to all of my courses, the 3 courses on pronunciation, slang and idioms, and British culture, and something else coming down the way. My wife's going to shoot me if I tell you, but something about grammar. On top of that, there are weekly Zoom sessions live with me. There's a conversation club, and there's also a Q&A session where I answer your questions. So you ask your questions, and whatever you ask, I will answer to help you. At the end of the day, I build these courses with you and for you, and you are my priority. There's also access to a huge library of lives and a community on WhatsApp where you can meet people from all over the world. There's really a lot going on, but I'll put the link down in the descriptions. So if this is the year you want to really learn British English, check it out in the description below. And I will say 1 whole month of this subscription costs far less than an individual lesson. And there are hundreds of hours of lessons for you to get to grips with. I hope to see you in the family. I probably should explain that we call the community the English Right Now family because my students are more than just students. They are genuinely part of my ever-growing family. So now let's talk about some sophisticated adjectives. Now, a lot of these aren't like-for-like replacements. They're just more sophisticated. But instead of saying something is smart, if you're making some observations and say, well, they were some smart observations, intelligent observations. You could use the word insightful. She made several insightful observations. In other words, really good observations. Instead of saying convincing or somebody's argument was very good, again, good is probably one of the most overused words by learners, you could say that an argument was compelling. It was a compelling argument. In other words, it was very well structured, very convincing, and very good. If you want to say something is impressive, instead of just saying, wow, you could say remarkable. The results were remarkable. In other words, they were amazing, impressive, and wow. Thorough is a great word you could use instead of complete. So we conducted a thorough investigation instead of, oh, we really investigated. Conducted there means did. Instead of large or real, you could say substantial. There has been substantial progress. Instead of saying something is strong or good, you could say robust. We need a robust strategy, a strong, well thought out strategy. If you watch something that makes you think, instead of saying, yeah, it was really interesting, like, oh, that documentary was really interesting, you could say it was thought-provoking. It was a thought-provoking documentary, or, he gave a really thought-provoking argument. Instead of saying something's possible, when you want to say it's more believable, we would use the word plausible. It's a plausible explanation. It's a believable explanation. Instead of new or creative, we could use the word innovative. Now, a lot of people struggle with the stress on this word. It is on the first syllable. Innovative. Innovative. It is not innovative. Innovative in British English. It's an innovative approach. So now let's move on to some sophisticated nouns. Instead of saying my opinion or I think, we could say perspective. It's an interesting perspective. In other words, it's an interesting point of view, an interesting opinion. Interesting is quite often in British culture a loaded word. It's a word that doesn't necessarily mean interesting. It just means weird, unusual, or I don't agree, depending on the tone of voice. So there is a difference between, wow, that's a really interesting perspective, or, yeah, it's a interesting perspective. The second one is far more negative. Instead of saying way, you could use the word approach. I like your approach, or I like your approach to the problem. In other words, I like your way of dealing with the problem. It's also an alternative to method, like I like your method. Instead of saying understanding or opinion again, you could say insight. Thank you for the insight. In other words, thank you for giving your opinion on how you understand things. Instead of saying guess, which could be a verb or a noun, but here we're using it as the noun, we could use the word assumption. We shouldn't make assumptions yet. We need to understand what's really going on. A nice little word you could use instead of result is outcome. The outcome exceeded our expectations. In other words, the result was far better than we thought it was going to be. One that's really common in the British workplace is framework. Instead of saying structure, you could say this in business or academia. We developed a framework for learning, or a learning framework. Instead of saying the word attitude, you could use the word mindset. Now, it's a little bit different, but we would say success often begins with your mindset. I often talk about this when learning English. If you have the right mindset and you really practice and focus on learning, then you're going to go far. Instead of using the word ability, we could use the word capability. He demonstrated exceptional capability. In other words, he was really able to deal with what we threw at him. Not physically, I mean, in terms of work, the workload that was thrown at him. Again, not physically, I didn't launch something at him. Nobody likes talking about limitations, but we could use the word constraint instead. Budget constraints prevented expansion. In other words, budget constraints prevented expansion. See how I'm giving you a kind of very basic version of the same sentence sometimes? These words just sound more sophisticated than what I said afterwards. Lack of money stopped us from getting bigger. No, budget constraints prevented expansion. Instead of saying thing to think about, we could say consideration. That's an important consideration. Instead of, yeah, that's an important thing to think about. Just sounds a bit more sophisticated. Now, no lesson with me would be complete without some British expressions. So let's talk about some sophisticated British expressions. Instead of saying generally, you could say by and large. By and large, people were happy with the changes. In other words, some people weren't, but on the whole, most people were. Instead of saying partly, I could say to a certain extent. I love the word certain. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So I agree to a certain extent. In other words, I don't completely agree, but I do agree to a point. The reason I said certain is because it all reminds me of Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, when called out on his lie in the second film, or the fifth film, depending on what you want to talk about, he says, well, what I said was true from a certain point of view. In other words, he lied, but he said it in a way that maybe somebody could understand that he wasn't lying. He lied. Obi-Wan. Instead of saying in general, we could say broadly speaking. Broadly speaking, the system works well, although I think we do need a few minor tweaks. If we want to make a contrast, instead of saying however, you could say having said that. This is a favourite in British English. It's expensive. Having said that, it's worth every penny. All things considered is a phrase that always makes me laugh because it's such hyperbole, isn't it? Because people say, all things considered, and I always want to say, have you considered all things? I'm not sure you have. But anyway, you could just say, on balance. On balance, it was the right decision. Instead of saying because of, we often say in light of. Now, in light of recent events, we've changed our plans. Again, this might be more common in the workplace. Instead of about, we could say in regards to or with regards to. In regards to your question or with regards to your question. The answer is no. Instead of regarding, we could have in terms of. In terms of pronunciation, you're doing very well. So there you have it. Some wonderful words that can instantly make your English sound more sophisticated. And you can let me know any others that you know down in the comments below. Please do remember there's that free PDF you can download. And remember to like and hype this lesson. But thank you very much for watching. And I'll see you in the next lesson.